Hello, everybody. My name's Henry Normal, and I'd like to welcome you to New Poetry Society. This is episode 5, and we've got a special guest today, and I shall be introducing her in a moment. I just want to say thank you for joining us, and thank you to Metronome for doing all the tech stuff and putting us on, and Confetti, and also Inspire, who work for the Nottingham County Council and the Nottinghamshire Libraries for bringing this to us. There's also the Arts Council, I think are helpful, NTU, and the Nottingham, I think I mentioned Nottingham County Council. They can have 2 mentions, why not? So thank you to everybody, Confetti as well, who are part of the group with Metronome. So a lot of people working behind the scenes to make this happen. And so thank you to all those. And we've got some poetry for you today, and we've got some chat, and we're going to answer some of your questions. So we have a chat facility down the side of the screen, and about halfway through today, I shall be looking at the questions. I keep them short so I can read them because I'm getting on a bit, and we'll be reading them as well, and we'll be trying to answer your questions. I'm going to do some poetry, and hopefully we'll find out about my special guest today. So please welcome a poet, performer, and I think a poetic dynamo. She's involved in so many things. Anne Holloway.
Hello. Hi. Nice to be here.
Yeah, and so what's your thoughts at the moment? Are you thinking that you can go out into the world, or are you still needing to restrain yourself a little bit with all this COVID nonsense?
I'm not good at restraining myself, Henry. It cannot be denied. I think I'm quite lucky that throughout the whole shebang, I've been out and about in the world, because I've been doing 2 days a week in an alternative provision school. So I had to be out and about, and I think it was a bit of a lifesaver, because quite a lot of the people I'm talking to now are still quite cautious about getting back to normal, whatever that may be.
Yes, we took a walk down an high street, me and my wife and my son, and we were surprised at the noise.
Yeah.
Because obviously it's been so quiet. Is that something that have you become more aware of your surroundings?
I think in terms of going into town or driving and things like that, it's been very noticeable. I'm a bit of a loner. I think many poets are. So it was quite a privilege to be out and about with none of the other people. So yes, it has, I think it's made me aware of how quiet it was without me realising.
Yes, yeah. Now, I'm loving your bookshelf behind you. There's probably some subliminal advertising in that, isn't there?
Not very subliminal. Strategically placed.
Yeah, for some reason, we'll all want to go and buy books that have been imprinted on our brains, which is good. Because I know that you've been involved in all levels of poetry, but probably what you're known for most at the moment is the Big White Shed.
Yes. Big White Shed is my baby. Big White Shed is a big white shed at the bottom of my garden, which is where the name came from. And we're an indie publisher. We're a peer publisher, which means that our peers work together to produce the manuscripts that then get published by us.
Yeah, so rather than somebody just send you something and you take it off them and then give it them back, you get very involved with the writer, don't you?
Very much so. I have lots of different kinds of writers, predominantly poets, and it's really important for me that they understand the whole process of producing, a book at the end of the day. And we work very closely right the way through.
Right, well, we're going to talk about all the stuff you're doing there, but I know, of course, you're a poet yourself, and you've got a book out. Well, you've got a couple of books out yourself. So will you start off by reading us a poem?
I will. I'm going to start off with reading you a poem. I came to Nottingham 100 years ago, about 25 years ago, and I found it I was quite isolated and quite alone. I had 2 young children and a sort of marriage that had gone tits up, and I found it very difficult, but I was lucky that I got a job at Nottingham Trent University. So a lot of the arts activities started seeping in. And one of the first things that I took the kids to was a thing called the Big Hug in the Arboretum in the middle of, I don't know if you remember it. And it was run by it was the Gao brothers, who are Chinese artists. They've been, I think they're in exile from China, actually. Correct me if I'm wrong. And they have this thing called the Big Hug, which is a thing where you're supposed to meet in a city and hug someone for, I think it was for 10 minutes. Of course, Knots folk don't do it that way, do they? They don't do what they're told. So they made their own version of the Big Hug. So, and this is a poem about that. It was the 30th of April, 2006. It's such a pretty park, but the sun doesn't reach the pond this time of day. The few shabby ducks are unimpressed by our leftover wholemeal bread. Two Chinese brothers wait with cameras for the people of Nottingham to show their love for humanity. The kids want to play hide and seek just till it starts, but I'm afraid not. That man by the toilets looks decidedly shifty. What the brothers Gao don't know is that on any other day, this is where men come to hug cans of lager. Today, in the name of art, we come to hug strangers.
That's lovely. That's lovely. Yeah, there is certainly with my upbringing in Nottingham, there is a sort of a thing that you'd nod. I always loved it when I saw French lessons at school, that people would shake hands. Xavier and Pierre would shake hands as 9-year-olds. And I thought that was quite sweet, actually. So I've very much got into shaking hands. And of course, as you grow and you get to know people, very much hugging. But I'm not sure about this elbow business.
I'm not sure about that either.
No. And so you've got a couple of books of poems. You've got one a book called There Are No Photographs. What I'm intrigued by the title.
I take pictures quite a lot, especially now I've got a mobile phone. And it's interesting that we take photographs of the happy times, don't we? We take photographs of the things that lift our spirit. And there is a line in the poem, when I was trying to find a title for the collection, there's a line in the poem about my youngest son and his dad and his relationship with his dad. And it makes me quite emotional thinking about it. And the line is, there are no photographs of disappointment. Yeah. So it was that really, because it's not a jolly read. It's quite thoughtful and it's quite sad. And it is about, it's that sense that there are no photographs of those moments in life where things are less than perfect.
That's a very astute observation. Of course, people don't take photographs at funerals, do they?
No.
Whereas they do at weddings and births and christenings. It's going to sound odd coming from me, but I actually prefer sort of more introverted poems rather than the sort of big production numbers. And now I know obviously it's great to have a balance, isn't it? It's great to have lots of different moods. People, whenever they ask you what's your favourite song, you've got to think, well, what depends what mood you're in.
Yeah. I also think, I know you write funny poems, but what I love about your poems is there's pathos. There's always a twist in it. There's always a little backstory in it.
And do you know what? And that stems right from the first one. I've got here, because I know you publish books, I've got here my first ever book.
Excellent.
Look at that, 19 poems, that is. That was published, as you can see, when I was a young man. And it was published by a Nottingham publisher called Your Own Stuff Press, working on a very similar principle that you do at Big White Shed, in that you get people involved. And you can see there, look, it's all handwritten. And it was
Brilliant.
purposefully handwritten so as to get over this idea of you know, things having to be a certain way. There's more than one poem on a page. There's no blank spaces or anything. And in actual fact, my address and telephone number are on the back. That's how personal I wanted it to be. That's quite nice, isn't it? So I'm going to read you a poem from this. So this is a very early poem of mine. It's called A Kind of Loving. It's a true story. She came home one day and he'd gone. In his favourite chair, he'd left a yoghurt. Unaccustomed to change, she lived with the yoghurt for 7 years. It never moved from the chair. They slept apart. She often wondered if there was someone else. It never ate what she served up. It ignored relatives. Often she would have to oof around it. Her sister-in-law told her she was balmy to stick it out this long, but she knew that marriage was something you had to work at. She went to marriage guidance on her own until they said they could do nothing further if the yoghurt didn't accompany her on her next visit. Eventually, she packed her bags and left. It was an hard decision. You can't live with a yoghurt for 7 years without it leaving its mark on your life. She had some fond memories, though, of those early days. She kept a photo of the yoghurt amongst her letters.
Oh, Henry.
So that mix of comedy and pathos, but looking for the truth of something, has always been the key to my understanding of poetry. You get involved in so much poetry. Can you define your sort of attraction for it?
You know, I've been giving this a lot of thought about what is it. I used to say I'm not a poet, I'm a writer, and that's not true. And I thought, why are you? And I think it's because I'm busy and I'm quite chaotic and I'm always doing lots of things and I'm always rushing around. And I think the only thing that gives me rest is a poem. And that's it. I could waffle, but that's it. It gives me peace and rest.
That's great. You know, I love that. There's something sometimes you don't need to read a novel. It's all contained. That moment's contained on a single sheet of paper, and I love that they can do that. I'm sure it's to do with feeling. That it's about a communication of feeling. As I say, very often you don't need to overdo that. We can communicate feeling, quite swiftly, I think.
Yeah, I think it's taken a lot of growing up for me to realise that. And I'm a Capricorn, so I was sort of born old and getting younger as I get older. Right. But there's also a maturing process at work in that.
Yeah. Now you've got a new book that you've been working on called A Poet Lives Here. Have you got it there? Because it's quite interesting the way you've.
It's a little square book. There we are. Yeah. This is the big white shed. I don't know if you can see.
Oh yeah.
Roof. And that was so when lockdown hit, I felt really angry and cheated because everything stopped. All my work got cancelled, and I realised I thought, how am I going to communicate? I had all this stuff I wanted to communicate, and I'd had those connections severed by this thing. And I rummaged around. I knew I had a pot of chalkboard paint in the cupboard under the sink. And I just went out and I painted it on the side of my tatty old shed. And I started writing a poem, practically a poem a day. And then I photograph them and stick them on Instagram, and it helped. And then people would say on Instagram, oh, look what we saw when we were walking around the streets of Mapley. It's poetry on the side of a shed. So I put together a book which kind of goes through the whole of that first lockdown period. I think it goes up till they're all dated. So you'll get the poem on one face and then you'll get the photograph of the poem on the other with the date.
And did you have to keep finding new bits to paint on?
No, it's a chalkboard. So
Oh, right.
I just wipe it clean and start again. So they're up and they're gone, and they're up and they're gone.
Oh, right. There's something quite nice about that, as and reflects us all. We're all
Yeah,
up and we're gone. Can you do us a poem from that collection?
I can. The one that I'm going to do is I put part of it in the book. It's a triolet. Google it. I found a new love of form during lockdown. I was always a bit sniffy about it, but I found myself working at form. But I can't for the life of me tell you what a triolet is once I've written it. And this is called a triolet for lockdown days. And the wind came reminding me of how my life had been before, mimicking sounds of crashing sea. And the wind came reminding me, trips to the coast and feeling free. The wind promises what's in store. And the wind came reminding me of how my life had been before. And the wind went and left me here to pass these days in lonely thought, wondering if we'll meet soon and where. And the wind went and left me here, posing the question, do I care? Should I feel lost and overwrought? And the wind went and left me here to pass these days in lonely thought. Then the wind whispered in the night, be kind, make no demands. Keep hopes and plans within your sight. Then the wind whispered in the night, bear your burdens as if they're light. Hold each moment in your strong hands. Then the wind whispered in the night, be kind, make no demands.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. And the great thing about that is the form and the repetition of the words just helps the rhythm and, it sort of cements it. That's brilliant. Because one of my worries is that form can get in the way.
That's exactly what I used to feel, and I think it still can. I used to think I don't need form, it restricts me. I don't need rhyme. I don't need patterns. But actually, again, I think it was the peace of lock time and working with a group of other poets. We used to meet up weekly online. We worked through different forms, and I found that sometimes, as long as I started with the idea that I thought I wanted to explore, sometimes it gave it momentum, it gave it pace. Yeah. And I think that was the thing with the wind. It really suited that kind of rolling rhythm. So I would say to people, give it a go. Don't feel shackled by it, but just have a play with it.
Yes. Even sonnets, people, the Shakespeare, and they cheat them a little bit. They don't stick exactly to the thing. No, I thought that was excellent. So when I first became aware of you was because of the Mouthy Poets.
Oh yeah.
So that was something that you were very much engaged with. I think you were co-director. Were you with the Mouthy Poets?
Yeah.
Can you tell people what the Mouthy Poets was?
So the Mouthy Poets was the brainchild of Debree Stevenson, actually, very much based on experiences she'd had with a poetry collective in London. And she came to Nottingham and found that there was nothing for young people. She was at uni here. And so she just thought, well, I'll set something up. If there's nothing to join, I'll make it. So it was a collective in that we welcomed anyone from 16 to 26 was the supposed age gap. Obviously, I was considerably older than that. And we used to meet weekly, and it was about finding your voice, exploring your identity. We would take writers and non-writers and help them discover the technique of writing poetry and performing and putting on events. And we had a home at Nottingham Playhouse, so the poets got the opportunity to perform on that massive stage to a big audience, which was really exciting. It was hard work. It was like being in a family, all the good and all the bad of being in a family. But I believe Bridie Squires was part of Mouthy Poets, and as was Ione Smallhorn, and their Gobs collective is, I think, a sort of took the Mouthy Poets as a sort of jumping ground, and they created something quite different.
Yeah, well, I've got to say it developed a great reputation, and I think probably helped the infrastructure of poetry in Nottingham. Now I know we've got people from all over the world watching today, but I'm interviewing Nottingham poets, and I think the particular sometimes illustrates the general. And what I found, having left Nottingham when I was younger, and thinking that there was no infrastructure. There was mushroom books, Selector Disc, and the library. That was about it if you were into art, and maybe the Midlands Centre lasted for a short while. But coming back and seeing the rejuvenation of Ockley, and seeing when we started the first poetry festival, how many of these poetry groups were around. It's quite thriving now in Nottingham.
It really is. It really is. It's like separate little tribes that intersect, which is the wonderful thing about the Poetry Festival, I think, because it brings everyone together. There's so many groups. I think there's a group for any kind of taste in poetry. There's a group in Nottingham that you could join.
There is. Now I'm going to read you a poem from when I got back into poetry about 5 years ago, 5-6 years ago. This is the first book. It was originally produced by Five Leaves, which is the Nottingham independent bookshop, and it was great of them because they were the first people to stock my books. In fact, they stocked that original book. God bless Ross. He put it on his shelves. And I think I read on your Facebook recently an article by Ross saying that quite a big percentage of what they sell at Five Leaves is poetry, which is a lovely thing to hear because you tend to think of it as being very much a minority sport. When we were talking a moment ago, you were talking about form, and I remember reading a quotation. I can't remember who it was by now. One of the main big old geezers, and it was you might know who this is from. That poetry without form is like playing tennis with the nets down. And I remember thinking instinctively at the time, I'm not trying to play tennis. I'm not trying to play any game. You've missed the point. It's not a parlour game. I'm trying to communicate something. So this is the first poem in this book. I think there's always something quite interesting, I'm sure, as a person who sorts out books, or something about what you choose as the first poem. And this is, again, about, you had a poem about wind. This is about air in another sense. It's called The Breath Within the Bloom. The breath within the bloom will not last. You never get inflated balloons on the Antiques Roadshow. Breath brings with it vulnerability. If never inflated, a balloon may last forever, but such limp reason will never enchant a child with decoration or gladden the heart with the stretching of possibility and the fulfillment of promise. Is not a universe of such balloons sadder than a universe where balloons are apt to burst? I hold your breath within my hand. The breath within the bloom will not last, but the giving of breath and the tying of the knot at each new birth is an offering for our choice of worlds.
Oh,
that's a nice one, isn't it?
That's really.
I read that once, Anne, and somebody said to me, "Whose poem is that?" That's the greatest compliment anybody's ever given me. That one of my poems is actually written by somebody proper.
Yeah. You're a proper softie, aren't you?
Well, I am, yeah, but I think there's something about all creatives that you step outside the world, don't you, and try to see how it works, and it affects you when you start empathising with other people. It affects you. It's very, very difficult to be a bigot and have empathy.
Yes.
Yeah. So, what's the latest books that you're bringing out? That's other people's.
Oh, I've been rammed this past year bringing out books. It's been fantastic. The one that is about to hit the stands, as it were, is by Gail Webb, who's I've only fairly recently got to know Gail. She's part of the strong part of the poetry community, and it's called The Thrill of Jumping In. And she's got a launch at the end of June, and all the proceeds, all the profits, I should say, are going to go to the Maggie Centre. And it's a lovely, it's quite a small collection. It's lovely. It's about friendship and grieving and family.
So what attracted you to Gail Webb's poetry? What was the thing that you said, you know, this is one that I've got to help?
The honesty, I think. The absolute authenticity of it. There's no, you know, bells and whistles. She uses very straightforward language, but so at the first reading, you read it and you get it, but then there's layers in it. Yeah. And she's obviously worked really hard at it. She's not just submitted a first draft. I can tell that she's really thought about all the words, you know, the decisions on every word, where she's putting a line end and things like that.
Yeah, I sometimes think that with comedy and with poetry, what we're trying to find is a greater truth, more than the facts. I always remember reading a book about how to write poetry. It's a dreadful book, but the line I remember was, it was talking about a shark, and it was saying that you could say a shark is like a big fish with teeth and everything, but then you could call it, you know, a sort of a torpedo with teeth. And there's something about that phrase torpedo with teeth which is slightly more truthful than your, you know, anatomic description of it. Something about the essence of it. I thought that was what I remember. I read that over 30, 40 years ago, and I always remember that from it.
I think that's why I quite like working with children, young people, because they sometimes see things, because they don't always have the normal vocabulary for things. They will use other words, and you think, bloody hell, you're right, it is a torpedo with teeth.
Yeah.
They don't know what the word for shark. So yeah, I think that I'm going to remember that now. That's a good way of describing to people how to look at things, I think.
Yes, yeah. Well, and now, so you do a lot of work with kids, but you do a lot of different workshops, don't you? Tell us about all the workshop stuff that you do.
I do on a regular basis now. Myself and poet Chris McLaughlin, who was one of the, there were 4, what do you call them? Runners-up, sounds terrible for the Nottingham's Young Poet Laureate. Yeah. Finalists. Yeah. I don't think they were runners-up. They were just. No, I know. Just scratch that from the recording. Yeah. We'll have no more. Yeah. Thank you for that. So Chris and I've known Chris for years, and we were running a thing called Write the Poem, because Chris I'd have conversations with Chris, and he'd go, Holloway, just write the bloody poem. So it became our thing of, don't talk about it, just write the poem. So we were meeting in the real world at Debbie Bryan's, and then at City Arts, and then lockdown came. So we just clicked onto Zoom. So that's every Tuesday, every second Tuesday of the month at 6 to 8. And anyone can come along. It's on Facebook. If people don't do Facebook and get in touch on the chat here, I can put them on an email loop. And you turn up, it's £4 if you can afford it. And Chris and I each do an hour's workshop, and it's just about generating work. So there's no feedback as such. It's just let's generate some new work.
Yeah, I've got to say I've been to the Arvon courses recently, because I just think to get out of yourself and to get out of your normal routine and to connect with other creative people, it just stretches you, doesn't it? Otherwise you get into a sort of ever decreasing circles.
Yeah. I mean, Arvon's fantastic. One of my first experiences of a writing workshop like that was at an Arvon, where I applied and got a free place, which you can still do. They have a budget, so they're about £800 a week, I think, aren't they, for a full residential?
I don't know. I've never paid for a full week. I've only done about 3 days. I'm good in small doses, Anne.
Yeah, yeah.
I wouldn't want to weaken myself, to be honest with you.
But they're brilliant, but they are available if anyone wants to do them. And you get fed fantastically, emotionally and physically.
Yeah, when I was a teenager, I would have hated the idea. Do you know what I mean? I think for some reason I thought, as a lot of sort of young people do, that the poetry around wasn't it wasn't passionate enough, and that I wanted to instill some passion into it. But of course, back then, I mean, I'm talking about the 70s. There were still people alive who had written First World War poems, and there was me trashing all these people behind us as though they're not passionate enough. I think once you realise that a lot of people that are writing in all sorts of things, there's a lot of passion there. You've just got to, like with every sphere, you've got to find the one that suits you. So now. Can you read us another poem? Because I'd like to get as many in as possible.
Yeah, I've got kids. I write about them all the time. They probably don't like it, but I think they put up with it. Your mum's a poet. Yeah. You've got a poet in your life. You can have your life broadcast and tweet quite slightly. So this is called Red Wharf Bay, which is on Anglesey. We had driven to the bay. My boy had his new kite. He unfurled the cord and let the wind take it, tugging the plastic handle in his hand, cord getting longer and longer, and he ran across the flat sand and watched his tiny kite fly, laughing, gasping for air, then stumbled, tripped and fell, and kite was gone. I ran to pick him up, wipe away the salty tears, but he wailed, loss bellowing from his tiny frame. The kite faltered and fell, slammed into a puddle of seawater pooled between the ridges in the sand, and I started to run to fetch it, but then saw the incoming tide galloping towards me faster than I could ever run, and I called out to a woman on a horse to save the kite, but she rode on, and my boy let out a sound, and I had to hold him back, climb up the rocks to watch the sea come thundering in and take the injured, flapping plastic thing. And why didn't you save it? Why didn't you save it? Rushing through my ears like the wind came rushing, like the sea. For his birthday, I bought a new kite, a spectacular flaming orange thing. He hugged it to his little body and smiled. But when we drove to the park to fly it, his whole body heaved and shook. He wouldn't let it go, and a tide of tears came in faster than I could run.
Oh, that's gorgeous. That's gorgeous. I love the way that you can be transported in a poem to another place and another time, and yet you're still yourself, but you're in this other world. It's gorgeous. Thanks for that. Now, I'll tell you what we're going to do now. We're going to open it up to some questions from the audience, because I know there'll be a lot of people out there wanting to ask you something. We do have, so we've got a chat facility and we've got a Q&A facility. I'm going to put the Q&A facility on and have a little read. Let's have a look. Annie, can you show us some of the more pages of your book, please?
I can indeed, if I can. Let's have a look. So, there we go. So you have poem, picture. So it was a very simple concept. I just wanted, really, originally I was going to just have the photographs from the side of the shed. You can see how faded it gets as I'm wiping it clean, and then at some point I had to repaint it. But it became clear that actually you needed the written word on there as well, so that you could read it more clearly. It was great. It was great doing it.
That's lovely, that, and it's a beautifully produced book. Now, some other people have been asking questions. I've got a question. Where's the best place to find out about all the poetry groups in Nottingham?
Well,
it'll be City of Literature, will it?
City of Literature, I think, has a listing online. I think Writing East Midlands has a listing online. There's also a Facebook group called Poetry in Nottingham, which if you just type in Poetry in Nottingham, it will pop up, and that will have everything to do with Nottingham. And I think really, if you contact any one of those, they'll start you on a trail. And once you grab one group, then you should be able to, link in and get others. So if you got in touch with me, I can tell you the ones I know. Yeah. DIY Poets would be able to tell you the ones they know. But certainly, yeah, City of Lit, Writing East Midlands, or Poetry in Nottingham Facebook group.
And of course, we should say that you are now the creative director of the Nottingham Poetry Festival.
I am.
Congratulations for that. Obviously, there'll be a lot coming up for the Nottingham. It was going to be this autumn, wasn't it? But
yes, that's right.
The main festival's been put back.
Yeah. I think we all felt felt that we would love to be able to do it. Originally, you started it in the spring, didn't you? And that's the spring works really well because you can have outdoor activities. You can have people don't have to worry about getting home in the dark or coming out in the dark for events. So when the old COVID pushed it to November, I think originally we were going to try and keep the momentum going, weren't we, Henry, and have it in November? But
that's right,
I think on reflection, we've made the right decision.
But I should say the original one, which was about 6 years ago, was Craig Chettle and myself that started off. But what I found was, as soon as we said we're going to do something, all these other people around Nottingham got together, and the response was overwhelming. I was incredibly delighted that I think it's almost like they'd just been waiting for somebody to say, let's do it.
Yes. Yeah.
And so it's quite a big array of people that are involved, but it does need a central core to make sure that it doesn't drift and it does happen.
I think being able to, because I remember in those first years, being in the brochure was really exciting, because a lot of the smaller organisations who run poetry events, we can't afford printed matter, and so to be on the all the marketing that the Poetry Festival put behind every single person was quite exciting for us, in the early days.
Certainly my thought that we try and give everybody equal billing. So everybody more or less got half a page if we could. It was the plan, space allowing. I think by putting a banner up in the centre of town on what we call the council house meant that it was saying we're here. We're not hidden behind a corner. We're here, and so that's the sort of thing that you can only do together as an organisation. You can't. Each individual group can't get a banner on the council. No. When you group together and you become something bigger, then you can start doing things bigger and showing that all these different parts are part of something that's quite huge. So, what are you most looking forward to on the Poetry Festival?
I love seeing the headline acts, the people that will be brought in from outside, because there's people that I wouldn't get the opportunity to see on a regular basis.
Yeah. But
it's the community element, it's the learning element that I'm really passionate about, and I think that's a realization that has come to me over the years. Yeah. It's doing workshops where someone writes a poem for the first time and you see the look on their face. That's what I love. So that's that thought of, I want everyone in Nottingham to know there is a poetry festival, even if they don't think they're interested in poetry, at least they know it's going on.
Well, I'm sure, like you yourself, I wouldn't have had the life that I have if somebody hadn't put on an event and I stepped up and read a poem very nervously at the time as a 18-year-old, I think I was, and so that opportunity is very important. So I think having the mix. One of the things I've instigated with the Poetry Festival, and I did the same with the Manchester Poetry Festival, which I started 25 years ago, was to make sure that whenever you have an headliner, you always have a local act with them, so that your headliner can bring in an audience and people know they're going to get a sort of a good evening. But you can surprise them with how good the local acts are and build them. And when I think back to the first year I put on in Manchester, one of the support acts was Lem Sissay, who is now a world poet. So you never know how far the young or person performing for the first time is going to go and what it's going to mean to their life. Mm. So somebody's asked what is your favourite the project that you've been involved with, because you've been involved with so many.
Oh blimey, that's a toughie, isn't it? My favourite project, I worked on a project, in all honesty, I don't have a favourite, but one that's just popped into my mind was a residency that I did in 6 primary schools. And we took the kids to an outdoor space, a gallery, and also we had museum objects. There's an organisation in the East Midlands that takes museum objects, they put them in boxes and they take them into community spaces and schools. Museum Development East Midlands, I think. And that was fantastic. So it was primary school children who I'd never worked with before. And I took them around Nottingham Contemporary, took them into the woods at Blydydd, I think we went to. It was just the writing and the excitement that came out of new vocabulary, a bit like we were talking about with the torpedo and the shark, to take them into a gallery and see how they responded to Nottingham Contemporary, who are really inclusive about having people in, and looking at museum objects, looking at old stuff and making stories about it. I thoroughly enjoyed that.
No, that's great. I'm going to say for me, I love doing my radio shows, and I sort of I do one about every eight months, and the one I'm working on at the moment is about aging. It's called A Normal Aging. So I've been finding out how aging works, and not just for humans, but in the animal kingdom, and finding out what would happen if you were immortal, what would the problems be, and all sorts of things. And for me, it's about exploring and thinking that you can still explore, that you don't know it all. In fact, that you can know considerably small amount of what's out there to know. I'm going to read you a poem. This is based on me researches for the for old age, and this is from hey. So, so I've come from that to that, a proper book, as my sister would say. The sort you get in a jumble sale. This is called Sitting with Colin Orchard at Stanmer Park. So Stanmer Park's a bit like Woollerton Park, if you know that. You don't need to know who Colin Orchard is. It explains in the poem. Sitting with Colin Orchard at Stanmer Park. The wind is sharpest in the shadows. There's enough blue to make a pair of jeans. We face a skyline of treetops, Lincoln Green offset with Copper Beach. A man wields a bit of plastic to help him throw a dog's ball further. Daisies decorate the grass like icing sugar on peppermint. A boy and girl punish a plastic globe whilst their mother carries a bag for life. Rain machines overhead roll south to reconnect with salt. A lightweight buggy stutters over open ground, a plastic bottle tucked in with the child. Sunlight is reaching us through a different mixture than it used to. Colin has a solid wooden bench with fine metal plaque. Much loved husband and father. I can't think of 5 greater words to mark a man. We watch the industry of nature turn carbon dioxide into oxygen. A woman helps her husband move the wheelchair up the slope.
Oh, thanks, Henry.
So what I like to do nowadays is I like to sit somewhere I wouldn't normally sit and look at the landscape and look at my inner landscape, if you like, and try to understand the moment. And so you get all these benches around, don't you, with people's names on that you don't know. And it's quite nice, really, to sit and think you're sitting with somebody that you don't know, but you might have something in common with.
I think it's interesting that I don't know how many times you've read that and you've written it, but you're obviously still really moved at that moment. I can tell the moment that you saw that plaque on the bench and then looked at everything. It's almost like, I don't know, I'm maybe making it up, but it feels like that poem.
No, I still find it. I find a lot of poems still moving, because I think what you're trying to do is, we were talking at the beginning, weren't we, about feelings. You're trying to recapture the feeling, and in a way, these important things are what's worth writing about. And whether it's Colin or whether it's somebody else, there's something about connecting with people, and somebody's took the trouble to put this plaque on this bench, and it means something to somebody that I do still find it affecting. It was lovely to see earlier that you were affected by a poem and by thinking about stuff in the past. We very often live our lives so busy that you can't detect people having feelings and having sensitivity. Certainly, when I was working in Soho, the idea of showing any vulnerability was not on the agenda. It was not, there was no space for that during the day. Let's have a look, see where we are. We're at 12:52, so we've got another 10 minutes, which is great. Let's see if we've got any more questions. If anybody wants to shout in any questions, that will be good. We've got a Q&A facility.
Yeah, we've got, who are your favourite poets who are writing now?
Oh,
Not just the ones you published from Claire Brown.
Yes.
Do you know, it's funny, the poet I'm reading at the moment is one I'm hoping to publish, who is Bron McIntyre. And I've been nagging Bron for a long time to send me some bloody poems. Show us your poems. Yeah. And now I have a document with every poem she's ever written. Well, not quite. So I'm reading that at the moment, and I won't say too much because I think she's on here somewhere. I always return to Malika Booker. Yeah. Malika Booker, if you haven't read her, she's a fantastic, a woman who finds a different way of looking at things. She writes about pain beautifully, and she is, you're talking about working with, when you have poets as a headliner and then you put a regional poet to support them as a support act kind of thing. That's really important in your poetry journey, I think, to be able to mix with poets who are further ahead in the journey than you are. And for me, Malika was the one who said, yeah, you are allowed to write your stories matter, and your stories are interesting to people, and gave me permission to write about my son losing his kite on a beach. Rachel Long is someone I bought recently and I'm starting to read. Who else do I return to? Love a bit of Walt Whitman, actually.
Yeah, no, it's interesting what you say about having permission to write your own story. I was talking to a 20-year-old on Zoom a couple of days ago who asked a question that I didn't think was going to ask, which is, why would anybody want to know about what I'm writing about? And of course, I've been there at, at 20. We would never have written The Royal Family if we weren't writing about what we wanted to write about. And we'd have tried to do something that was more, sort of set in place what other people were doing. I think your own story, you are the expert on your own life. It's the thing you know the most. It's the thing that all the great writers on earth don't know. They don't know your story. They can't write it in the way that you write. I always say, Stephen Fry, who's a brilliant writer, and I've met him and a lovely bloke, he couldn't write The Royal Family.
No.
He'd not lived it. And I think there is worth in all lives. And it's interesting what you said about a local poet. It's almost like a derogatory term, isn't it? A local poet. But everybody's local somewhere. There's no poet ever born that wasn't local. And sometimes we celebrate that, don't we? You get to Stratford, you celebrate the local poet there.
Yeah.
You get to the Lake District, you celebrate the local poet there. I think Nottingham has got a great history of local poets. From Byron and Lawrence, and Sillytoe wrote some great poems. Stanley Middleton, I think, has just had a book of poems published after his death. There's great new poets coming through as well, so we should be proud. I mean, there's poets in the past. Do you ever read Henry Kirke White?
No.
Henry Kirke White is a naughty. I was made to read him at school and didn't, as you are at school, didn't quite connect. But he died as a young man. So I've just ordered his book from Five Leaves, so I can read the full lot, because I came across a couple of them, and he died of TB in his early 20s, and his poems are very affecting, I find. So I say there's undiscovered gems out there, and you don't have to look too far for them. That's the great thing.
No, very, very true. I think I was caught up at one point when I discovered poetry is what I wanted to do, and that wanting to be, a big poet, a famous poet. And there's a realization that part of that seems to be that you have to go to London. You have to go to London and do this and be published there and win that prize. And then I think it's a sense of maturing. This is where I choose to be, and so I'll be whatever poet I can be in this place.
Yeah, I don't think you think of the great poets in history and think they all lived in London, though, do you?
No, not at all. Bonkers, absolutely bonkers. I think perhaps it's become more of a business in some way, and we need to kick back against that, I think, and know that we're all doing it wherever we are. Yes.
Lem Sissay has a lovely phrase that he told me when he was 19, which I've always remembered: a salad, not a soup. That's what we need. We need a distinct flavours. Let's not homogenise into some sort of London mush. Great, the people who are in London, and it's great that they have their say as well. I'm sure there's plenty of stories. We're about due for time. I think we've got time for a poem each, and a little bit of a wrap up. So have you got a poem?
I feel like it should be a quickie, really, shouldn't it?
Don't have to be a quickie. Just one that you're proud of, that you like.
Well, there's one I've done fairly recently that was about. I'll shut up and just do the poem, and it's called "See Like a Poet." I watched the starling doing nothing, just sitting on the top of the stink pole in the side street off Woodborough Road. His feathers glinted like a cheap brooch, the kind my grandmother would call costume. Costume jewellery is the kind of jewellery that caught my eye as a child, and now, if I'm honest. A big fat diamond has so many negative connotations these days, a lot of baggage for a bit of sparkle. Sometimes I want to be able to see a bird and just stop at that, a starling on a stink pole on a side street. Instead, my mind goes off lickety-split, leaving me to catch up and make the connections if anyone questions, how the hell did you get there? I found the stink pole when I parked the car to visit the cafe where the man makes most excellent coffee, if you like coffee, but hasn't a clue how to make a proper brew for me, a tea drinking kind of girl. I feel wicked harbouring these negative thoughts for a man passionate about his art, but really it's just a cup of coffee. He has such an air of the regent about him and it really gets my goat. It's just a bloody cup of coffee, mate, I want to shout. It makes me think of that time I saw a play where John Malkovich, playing himself really, explained the art of tea making in such a way I wanted to yell from the auditorium, for Christ's sake, John, it's just a cup of tea. Of course, that would have ruined the scene, so I stayed quiet, like I do with the man in the cafe across the road from the stink pole where the starling sits, doing nothing. Sometimes I want to be able to see something and just stop at that.
Oh, great. I love the ending. You go, oh, wait, what? That's the end. Oh, well, you stopped at that. Brilliant. Thank you, Anne. Thank you for being my guest today. Next week, the same bat time as they used to say, 12 noon. I've got Kathy Grinrod. You know Kathy, don't you, Anne?
Yes, she was a mentor in my early days. She's fantastic. Don't miss it. She's wonderful.
She is absolutely brilliant. And actually, she started a poetry festival several years ago and organised it. So I'll be talking a lot of things to her. So thank you to everybody who's tuned in. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you to Inspire and the Nottingham Libraries and the Notts County Council. They get 3 mentions today, that's not bad. To Metronome, Confetti, the NTU, the Arts Council, and everybody. I hope I haven't missed anybody's name out. I'm going to end with a poem from my latest book, which is this one here, nice and colourful. You'll see that it's got one of my son's paintings on it, and there's one of my son's painting behind. So I do like a bit of colour in my life. This is called Lodestar, and I was thinking about how we want something to hang on to that is permanent or something that is steady. And the more I looked into the North Star, the more interesting it became. So I say thank you everybody for being with us today, and I hope to see you again. It's called Lodestar. Polaris is only true north when constellations align. It has shone brighter and not so bright, and despite Shakespeare was never constant, despite Spencer was never steadfast. Early generations were steered by other stars. Future souls will seek guidance elsewhere. There is no fixed point in the heavens. It is only that a human life is so short and human longing is so vast.